Okay, this is, if you don't know, the last class. So thanks again to the elders for the opportunity. And thank you for being here and your encouragement for being in this study. And I appreciate your discussion. That's how we learn. We learn in community. So appreciate you being here. And we have come to the end. Rudyard Kipling talks about a little boy in one of his books who learns how to read, and he has a hard time learning how to read. And he keeps on. Finally, he learns how to read. His teacher said, "You've learned how to read." And he said, "I've learned how to read. I shall never read again." That's not how this is to be for us. So this is, when we come to a passage, I mean, the whole point of the history and the language and all of that is not in itself. It's to understand the text. And to understand the text is not because we worship the Bible, we worship the God of the Bible. And He reveals Himself in words, and He reveals Himself in grammar, and He reveals Himself in historical situations. So the better we understand that, the better we understand the text. And if we don't, then we end up just pulling stuff out and misusing text to mean something that they never meant or intended to mean. The Bible is most powerful when it means what it was intended to say. So let's continue our study in that. When we come to a passage, explore the background. That's a whole different world over there. In fact, there's a commentary series, maybe NIV application series, and it has a section where it goes back and explores the original context and the history and the language and all that. And then there's a section, I think they call it a bridge or something, where it's bridging over to our time, because God's Word is still living and it's applicable to us. But we don't start with us. We don't start sitting at my kitchen table and reading this passage and what this means to me is this. We start with the text and what the text says. Okay, so you have these handouts. It seems like I don't have a problem with clearing my voice till I start talking. But I want to, we're up into New Testament time, and I think on the syllabus it's the time of Acts and until the destruction of Jerusalem. We're going to go a little bit past that, I think, because there was another revolt in the 100s, maybe 135. But look first at the emperor chart. And again, you know, whole classes have been on this different material, but it's good to have some sort of a background understanding of this. So this is Roman emperors of the New Testament period. And out beside I didn't make this, I found this, but out beside in the blocks there is like a little summary of how these relate to New Testament times. So all these emperors are related in some way or another to the history of the New Testament. So it begins with Caesar Augustus or Octavian. When he defeated Mark Antony and Cleopatra, he became the august ruler. And he brought a lot of good to Rome, Pax Romana, Roman peace, the mail system, security, safety, all of that. And all that, I think, is behind the idea that the exact right time God sent His Son, born of a woman, born under the law, to redeem us. So that's Caesar Augustus, and he's the Caesar, of course, at the birth of Jesus. And the next Caesar is Tiberius, and Jesus' ministry is under this Caesar, and he is associated with Pilate as well. And when Jesus says, when they say, is it, should we pay the temple tax? And he said, show me a coin. And by the way, they did have a coin. Having a coin meant that they were using the coin and what the coin brings. And so Jesus says, show me a coin. And they produced a coin. And he said, whose image is on it? It's this emperor Tiberius. The next Caesar is Caligula. His name is Gaius. Caligula's a nickname. It means little boots. and it's because when he was a little kid, and he's running around, I guess, in high society circles, and he'd wear the boots of, a grown person, and he'd come all the way up to, and so they called him Caligula, or Little Boots. It seemed like I read somewhere if you called him that when he was emperor, it wouldn't go well for you. But he lived a decadent life. He was a cruel. I mean, he's not standing out among all the others. I'm pretty sure about all of them shared these things. He tried to put a statue of himself in the Jewish temple, but he died before that could be carried out. Kind of what I'm going to do is go through this, and then we'll go through the Herods again and sort of back up on some of this, so it's kind of back and forth. But the next emperor is Claudius, and he is known for in the New Testament. And if you look at Acts 18, and he expelled the Jews from Rome, and that caused a Jewish couple, Aquila, or some people want to say Aquila, but Aquila and Priscilla, to be in Corinth. They had previously been in Rome. So Acts 18 tells us that, and Paul comes in contact with them. So verse 1, after these events, Paul left Athens, went to Corinth, and he found a Jew named Aquila, a native of Pontus, having recently come from Italy with his wife Priscilla, because Claudius had commanded all the Jews to leave Rome, and he came to them. Where are the handouts, Greg? Okay. I think Pam needs one. So in verse 3, we learned that in Acts 18 that he was of the same trade with them, and he stayed with them. They worked together. This is interesting. There's a Jewish writer, his name is Suetonius, and Suetonius mentions this event as well, of Claudius expelling the Jews from Rome. And he says it was over an incident that involved somebody named Chrestus, Chrestus. Now, it's not for sure, but many scholars think that is a form of Christos, and so that there was some disturbance among Christians and Jews, and so Claudius just kicked the Jews out of Rome. So it's not for certain that that's true, but Suetonius does mention Chrestus. Also, here in Acts 18, toward the end of the chapter, you have am I in the right chapter of Gallio? Yeah. In verse 12, Gallio was a ruler of Achaia, and the Jews rose up together against Paul and brought him before him. And again, we know from history that Gallio was in Corinth in late spring of 50 until early summer of 54. So during that period is when this occurred. And that's, you pinpoint that down pretty good. So that's Claudius, and Claudius also made Herod Agrippa the first king over Palestine. Let me stop, see if you have comments, questions for me.
It was 50 to 54 when he expelled them?
We don't know the exact date when he expelled them, but we know Gallio is here, and they've just
Before that.
yeah, it had to be before that, so they just made it.
I thought I heard it was in the 30s or something. I could be wrong.
No, can't be in the 30s.
When was it again? What was the date?
50 to 54, Gallio is in Corinth. In 55, he's somewhere else, we know from record. This is from the Delphi inscription. So Claudius is emperor 41 to 54. So it's got to be in that period. And so it's probably toward the end of his reign, because it appears that Aquila and Priscilla have just arrived in Corinth because of what this happened with that. So, again, I don't know for sure, but you can do some research on that. Search Suetonius and Claudius expulsion of Jews. Anybody else? Questions, comments? All right, the next emperor is somebody we've heard about, is Nero. And he's known for his cruelty as well. And most scholars say that early in his reign is the golden years, the golden reign, and he was a pretty good emperor. They say he's as good as anybody else, I guess. But an event happened in 64. Does anybody know what happened in 64 in Nero's reign? Yeah, Rome burned in 64. And I mean, when Paul would go to these different places, there's evidence. I mean, if he'd set up shop, and he did work at a lot of places, and it upset like the Corinthians, because they would rather he not work, because there's this whole patron-client relationship. And if you don't work, then we pay you, we're paying for you, so you can't say something we don't want, we disagree with. And Paul said that, I've received support from people, but I'm going to work with my hands. And he also did this to teach the Corinthians. I mean, Greeks despise working with their hands. And so they said, Romans build bridges, we write poetry and philosophy. We don't work with our hands. And so Paul works with his hands, I think deliberately in his trade, to teach the Corinthians. But anyway, he would go into these big metropolitan places and maybe rent out a shop on a lower level, and then the upper level would be an apartment or something. And there could be several levels. And there's evidence that when Rome burned, it was like high-rise apartments. And, once fire started, it just swept through all of that and burned whole districts. And then, of course, and there's, some talk among ancient people that Nero himself set the fire so he could expand Rome. That whole idea of Nero fiddling while Rome burns. But and as you probably know, Nero was trying to take the heat off himself, and so he blames Christians, and not just Christians, but fringe groups, other fringe groups, and the historians talk about that.
Was the part that burned kind of like the slums? I mean, you said he wanted to do that so he could expand Rome.
I guess it was locked in somehow or another. I don't know. I don't know enough about it probably to say, but
I'd heard that it was a kind of a
lower rent.
Yeah.
Urban renewal.
Yeah.
Yeah, it really
Urban
was.
renewal
Yeah.
at the expense of, at great expense.
Yeah.
And the writers talk about the horror of all that, and I'm sure you heard that, and impaling Christians on stakes. But it's under Nero that Peter and Paul died. Any other comments, questions? We're going to skip through that next one real quick, or the next three real quick. This is known as the year of the four emperors, and the four emperors are Galba, Otto, Vitellius, and Vespasian. And we'll talk about that in a minute, because Vespasian was involved with the siege of Jerusalem, and he had heard that Nero died in 68, and so he goes back there to see the talk, see what's going on. He was a general, to see what's going on. And he gets back, and real quick, 69, there's Galba, Otto, Vitellius. And a lot of this, I think, is significant. We're going to talk about Matthew 24, but Jesus says there will be wars, there will be rumors of wars, there will be unrest. That's part of it, of this year of the four emperors, with all this civil war going on. Then we come to Vespasian, and it said he's the Roman general in in charge of the war on the Jews. It began in 66, the revolt did. And he returns to Rome, and he becomes the next emperor. And when he returns, his son Titus, he puts Titus in charge of the army, and he's known as the one who destroyed the temple and burned Jerusalem. So the next is Titus, and he becomes the next emperor. And then the last emperor on the list is Domitian. Under Domitian, according to the records, you have the first widespread persecution of Christians. Now, this is a study of Israel, the history of Israel, and not so much Christians scattered all around. We just kind of took a side road there about Nero and Christians in Rome. But depending on when you would date the book of Revelation, and there are good arguments on both sides of this, but some would date, right now I would date Revelation 90 to 100, and so the emperor would be Domitian. If others would date Revelation in the time of Nero, and so it was talking about the fall of the Roman Empire coming up. So, but under Domitian, he's really the first one to demand emperor worship. Some of the others, might, and they're leaning toward that idea, but most of them thought it's pretty ridiculous. In fact, there's one of them, I can't remember who it was, when he was dying, they said, "You have any last words?" And he said, "I think I'm becoming a god." And he didn't mean that in a serious way. He was making fun of the others. But there's, in the book of Revelation, that anti-Rome, and Rome is like Babylon, and it stands for, it has a historical setting, but as long as the world stands, there will be Babylons and there will be Romes. And God, through His Lamb, His suffering Lamb, is able to conquer them. And His people, if they're children of the Lamb, are going to be victorious. In fact, more than conquerors.
What you said that Revelation has to do with this time period, you said.
There are good arguments on dating Revelation either under Nero or under Domitian. And so under Nero will be an early date of Revelation. A late date of Revelation would be Domitian, would be the emperor. And it seems to fit in better to me. And again, it's not a class on Revelation or that I defend my view of the date of Revelation, but it seems to fit in better under Domitian. Really, it's not. We're not told. It doesn't open up and say, okay, this during time Nero, during time Domitian. And really, the spiritual lessons are there in both settings. Okay. Any other thoughts, comments, questions?
On that Vespasian, one of the things that I don't know if you intended to get into this is, talking about Jerusalem, but Vespasian is leading the Roman forces, and as they're closing in on Jerusalem, all the turmoil in Rome, he knows that there's a succession
Yeah.
issue, and so he draws back the siege because he's willing to go back to Rome at that point. And so as they relaxed the siege, it gave the opportunity, from what I hear, and not just Josephus. Josephus talks about
Yeah.
the mechanisms of all that and the change in generalship, and that the Christians who were left in Jerusalem recognized, and this is something, I don't know if you're going to talk about this, but
Go ahead. Yeah. Yeah.
Christians saw
Yeah.
that this, the abomination which makes desolate has already, shown itself, and they take the prophecy of Jesus and say, head to the mountain.
When he says the days were shortened.
Yeah.
For the elect's sake.
Yeah.
I think Eusebius mentions that, yeah, there are hardly any Christians listened and took seriously what Jesus said, and so they didn't die in the destruction of Jerusalem.
Right.
It's not to say not any died, and there might have been some, but
Yeah.
and there were other times when he would kind of if you're a pagan general, a Roman general, and you believe in all these gods that are out here, you believe in the God of the Israelites. And you don't want to go around just burning down temples of all these gods. And so he didn't want to burn down. He tried to get them to surrender, but they wouldn't. And there's several things going on. There were the zealots who had taken Masada, and then some were left in Jerusalem. And when people would say, the best thing to do would be to surrender to the Romans, they would kill them before they could get to the Romans. And if some did escape, then the Romans would kill them. It was a non-win. It's almost like one writer, maybe Josephus, but says that the Romans are attacking from the outside and the zealots are destroying Jerusalem from the inside. And so, and that's behind all that suffering language that we have in Matthew 24. But there were various times when he backed up to give them breathing room, maybe to surrender, and they wouldn't. And the zealots would sneak over the wall and set tar and pitch on the military machines. And the Romans wonder, how's that mysterious fire start right there that burned down our thing? And even one time, it says that the soldiers were going to be paid, and Roman soldiers, when they were paid, would dress up in their full uniform and sit on their horses, and that was going on right outside, and the Jewish citizens are watching that, wondering what's going on. He's paying the soldiers. But that is an important point, that in that breathing room that Christians took seriously what Jesus said, and they were able to escape. Thank you for that. Any other thoughts, comments, or questions? All right, I didn't set an alarm. We'd be here all night. If I set it at 7 a.m., we might. Okay, so let's look at the Herod chart, or the Herod handout. And this is material from different people. Some of this, I've cut and pasted this together and then added to it and stuff. But these are the Herods that are in the New Testament. One time I was teaching a university class, and one student, I gave a test and had an essay question on the test, and one student wrote an entire essay on Harold the Great. He's not Harold, he's Herod. And it might have been, they were listening to the way I was talking. All right. So, of course, we know Herod the Great. And he was a client king. And he was a good politician, too. And some of this we covered in the past, so we're not going to back up and go through all that again. But he was Idumean, which is descendant from the Edomites, and he's not a full Israelite. Jewish people didn't trust him, and in fact, but to the Jewish people, he said, "Well, I keep the food laws," and yet then he's murdering everybody. And one Roman writer said it would be better to be Herod's pig than to be Herod's son, and it was a play. It's written in Latin, I think, but it's a play in the Greek. Vis and vos, but vos and vis. So to be Herod's pig, he's not going to eat that because he's going to eat kosher. I'm Jewish. But he'd kill his son, and he killed sons and wives. And he tried to trick the wise men, and he killed the babies in Bethlehem. And when he died, or right before he died, he gave the order that the soldiers were to round up Jewish people and kill them when he died, because he said, at least some people will be crying when I've died. And of course they didn't do that, and he didn't know that they didn't do that.
What's a client king?
Client king meant that he answers to Rome. Rome had, I mean, and he's in a sense his own king, but he's not autonomous. They would put this ruler over a place, and they pretty much say, do whatever you want to do and whatever.
As long as you don't cause problems for us, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
So is it kind of like a puppet king, but it's not as extreme?
It'd be like a puppet king. You had a patron, and this whole relationship, patron-client relationship, was very common in New Testament times, and it's not really a demeaning relationship. It's a lot of it would work even in everyday life in different areas, like artisans, and they would have somebody that was their patron, and so Herod, he finagled around. He went to Rome and worked the politics, and so he becomes this king now of Judea.
So Judea is still on the hook to pay Roman taxes.
Yeah.
They've got to subject themselves to Roman rule and authority.
Yeah.
And the imposition of having, Roman armies.
Yeah, they got to put up with that.
Yeah.
They're not free,
Right.
and they hated that. Seeing all the Roman, and Herod had a palace in Jerusalem. He had a palace over at Caesarea, and he was a big builder, and it didn't seem odd to him that he built the temple of God and then build, all kind of other palaces and temples to other gods. Even build your own burial place. But in Jerusalem, it's common for the rulers or during feast days to come over to Jerusalem because something could break out. Because it's thought especially Passover, that's when Messiah is coming, and it's just going to turn into a big, all this excitement and turn into a riot. So he had palace. He even had a palace down there at Masada, which had hot and cold running water and swimming pool. This is on top of a mountain. Hot and cold running water and swimming pools. Marbling. He brought artists in to do marbling and graining. There was a synagogue there, and on top of a mountain now. It took a lot of work to do that. So he's going to be comfortable. Any other questions on Herod the Great? All right, three of his sons. Then, so when he dies, the Jewish people send a delegation to Rome, and they say, "We don't want any more Herods. We've had enough. Just give direct Roman rule. We'll handle that." And yet, his sons, in the will, it was said that the kingdom would divide among three sons. There's another son, but Herod killed him. So these three sons, Archelaus is one of his sons that's mentioned in the Bible, and he controlled around Jerusalem, Judea, and Samaria. And in Matthew 2, Joseph and Mary flee to Egypt, and then Joseph is told the one who's seeking his life is dead. That's Herod the Great. And then in Matthew 2:22, it says that he didn't go to Bethlehem because that's in Archelaus territory. He went to Nazareth. Herod was eventually, two of these sons were banished and one died. But Archelaus was banished and went because of poor management. He wasn't, didn't handle things too well. And so Judea became under Roman procurators until AD 41, and that's when another Herod becomes king again. Herod Agrippa, he's a grandson of Herod the Great. So after 44 procurators are in control, and we'll look at the procurators in a moment. Thoughts, questions?
Why did he just kill one of his sons?
He didn't just kill one of his sons, and this was said to be a swimming accident. You just never could tell with Herod. you know, if you're going to make it or not. I mean, Mary Amni, he said, was his favorite wife, and then he killed her. I think, you know, it's a lot of paranoia going on.
So Philip was also one of Herod's sons.
Yes, Antipas and Philip were as well. Archelaus, Antipas, and Philip. Any other thoughts on Archelaus?
So it's not just, so he just has 3 sons, or he has
Oh
more?
yeah, a bunch of sons. There's
Oh, he had more than the 4.
yeah.
Oh,
Yeah, a lot. He had a lot of wives and a lot of sons, and
Only 3 sons mentioned in the Bible.
yeah,
That's what
these
it
are the ones that are associated with the Bible. And many of them didn't make it. All right, the next son is, so you see here, and these dates here are not the dates that they lived. These are the dates that they ruled. So you have Archelaus, Antipas, and Philip began at 4 BC, and that's when Herod dies. So we come to Antipas, and he is the Herod that Jesus had the most contact with in the Gospels. He's the Herod that Jesus called the fox in Luke 13:32. As Jesus is on his way in his journey to Jerusalem, and he says, and they said, you don't go there, it's dangerous, and he calls Herod a fox. It means he's crafty. Probably applied about all the Herods. And he controlled Galilee and Perea, and he divorced his first wife and married Herodias, who was the wife of his brother Philip. And John the Baptist spoke out about this early on, and that didn't go well. And so he just had John the Baptist killed, murdered. Antipas is the one that Pilate sends Jesus to him as part of his trial because Herod is in Jerusalem at this time. I mean, his normal territory is up there around Galilee. And Luke 23:12 says, Pilate and Herod Antipas became friends that day, which is kind of a strange statement. I mean, you know, why do we need to know that? But it's almost like the idea Sadducees and Pharisees didn't get along. They didn't like each other. But they had a greater hatred of Jesus than they did of each other. And so when Jesus, in his last week, as he journeys to Jerusalem and arrives to Jerusalem, and all those events, the triumphal entry and the cleansing, all that, then you have the Sadducees and the Pharisees plotting together to destroy Jesus.
The enemy of my enemy
Yeah.
is my friend.
And then it takes, I preached a series on the last days of Jesus. It was very helpful to me. But the text says they're seeking an opportunity to put him to death, but they can't because the people are listening. And then all of a sudden, a traitor shows up and he says, I'll deliver him to you. So you have in Mark, maybe chapter 14, verse 1, it says they're seeking opportunity. And then the next verse says, Judas goes to them and says, I'll betray him. So they need a traitor, and here's a traitor, Judas. All right, any other thoughts on Antipas? Next is Philip, and Antipas was put out of office because of bad rule, but Philip actually died in 33 or 34, and he controlled the territory north and east of Galilee. And you remember Salome, the daughter of Herodias, who came in and wanted the head of John the Baptist? Philip married her.
Is that his daughter?
They're related. I don't know how it all works out.
Yeah. Okay.
But
It was at least his wife's daughter.
yeah, his wife's. Yeah,
If she'd been married to Philip, you'd think that was her daughter.
yeah, I don't know.
Either way, it's pretty bad.
Then she was married to Antipas.
Yep.
She might have been married before that.
I think there's a good likelihood of that. So it's and that happens a lot in the Herod family. It's really, it's really complicated and very evil and sinful, and the Gospel's speaking out, against all of that. And Jesus speaking out against all of that. All right, anything else on Philip?
Okay, so it said he died. Was that a natural?
Yeah, it was natural death. He wasn't, what's the word I used before? I can't think of it right now.
Assassinated?
No, not assassinated.
Exterminated.
If somebody's a bad ruler and they send them off somewhere else, like to an island or something, exiled, yeah. He wasn't exiled. He died in office, and he built Caesarea Philippi up around Galilee in honor of Caesar. And there's another Caesarea when we go to the land. We will see, but there's another Caesarea on the seacoast called Caesarea Maritima. When you fly into Tel Aviv, Caesarea Maritima is right there close by. And if you go down south, you go to Jaffa, where Jonah went. But up there, and you probably know this, in Galilee is Caesarea Philippi. That's Philip's Caesarea. And it's the ancient place of Banias. And they're little shelves, niches up there with pagan idols all around. And we don't know for sure, but it's thought that, because that's where Jesus says, who do people say I am, and who do you say that I am? And they say, you are the Christ, the Son of the living God. And it's a suggestion. He's in Caesarea Philippi, but he could have been in that place, and there's all those idol things all around on the mountains, and he says, you are the Son of the living God. But Philip built Caesarea Philippi. Okay, number 5 is Herod Agrippa, and he is the grandson of Herod the Great. He's the nephew of Herodias, and he appears in the Bible in his famous Acts chapter 12 when he arrests Peter and murders James, and the church is praying for Peter's release, and Peter is released. And then he's beating on the door because the door's locked and they won't let him in. They don't believe that he's been released. And, they say it's got to be his ghost or something. He's probably dead. So, and Acts chapter 12 begins with Herod doing that. And then Acts chapter 12 ends with a picture of Herod in a theater. And the people, and the sun was shining on his garments. And it says he's a god. And he didn't give glory to God. I mean, if you look at Acts 12 real quick. So, verse 1, now about that time, Herod the king, that's Agrippa the first, laid hands on some who belonged to the church to do them harm. And he did. He had James executed, and he arrested Peter. And Peter is released, and so the end of the chapter, see verse 19, Herod searched for him, he couldn't find him, but verse 20 is another incident. He's angry with the people of Tyre and Sidon, and they came to him, and on an appointed day, verse 21, he took his seat on this bema, on this platform, and he began delivering an address to them. And the people repeatedly cried out, the voice of a God and not of a man. And immediately an angel of the Lord struck him because he did not give God the glory, and he was eaten by worms and died. And Josephus says the sun was shining off his garment, and the people are shouting, he's a god. But he did not give God the glory. So it opens, he's arrested, or killed James, and he arrested Peter. He's a threat. What's going to happen here? Is this the end? But God takes care of that, and then God takes care of Herod at the end. And then look at the very next verse, verse 24. But the word of the Lord continued to grow and to be multiplied. So not even a Herod can stop the word. Not even Herod could stop the church. So that's a bad end for Herod Agrippa the First. Any thoughts about him? That's confirmed or illustrated also in Josephus.
I'm assuming that's parasitic ones.
Yeah, I don't know. Josephus pictures it as a pretty drawn out process. It's not like immediately. Here it says that the angel struck him and he was eaten by worms and died. It doesn't say after how long he was eaten by worms, after how long he died. Did it continue on or what? So yeah, must have been something like that. Not good. All right, the last Herod in relation to the New Testament is Herod Agrippa II. He's the son of Herod Agrippa I. And he becomes ruler in the 50s. And when his father died in 44, in that incident, Herod Agrippa II is too young to rule, or the Romans thought he was too young to rule. And so Rome puts the procurators back into effect. And eventually Herod Agrippa grows up and he becomes king. And he's famous for later in the book of Acts with Paul. In Acts chapters 25 and 26, he with Festus interview Paul. And he's famous also for where Paul, or he says to Paul, in a short time you'll persuade me to be a Christian. And is that a question? Is that mocking? Or is he sincere? I don't know. We can't hear the tone of his voice. Maybe he's saying, in a short time, you persuade me to be a Christian? Or is he saying, if we have more time, I might become a Christian? Agrippa and Festus were allies. Festus is the Roman procurator. And Agrippa built a dining room in Jerusalem with a porch that would overlook the temple. And the Jewish people thought that's inappropriate for this king. And I guess maybe the idea is he could see into the temple. And so the Jewish people said that's inappropriate. And they built a wall to block his view. And then Festus ordered the Jewish people to tear down the wall. And the Jewish people, Nero is emperor at this time, and the Jewish people sent a delegation to Rome and laid all this out, and Nero basically said, leave them alone. They can keep the wall. So that's an interesting thing of the inner workings of Agrippa and Festus. Also, during Agrippa's reign, the building project of the temple came to an end. It's been ongoing. I mean, Herod wanted to tear the whole thing down at Temple Mount and build again. The Jewish people said, no, you're not doing that because we don't trust you. You'll never rebuild it. So he just, we still have the temple from Ezra and Nehemiah and the remnants of that. And so Herod greatly expanded the Temple Mount. And he would build and build. And so when there's building projects, then there are a lot of jobs. And that helps the economy. And so there were a lot of building projects under Herod the Great. In Agrippa's time, the building project of the temple came to an end, and about 18,000 people were out of work. It's not long after this. In 66 is when the Jewish revolt begins, and some scholars say that had something to do with it. That he got all these bad rulers around, now we don't have any jobs. All right, thoughts, comments on Herod Agrippa II? All right, let's look at the procurator handout. And we're not going through these one by one. I just know the names of some of these. Some of these I don't know anything about. I'm sure you can find something about them. But procurators are, they're like governors, and they're middle class. And they had patrons too. They'll have a patron, somebody that sponsored you. And they make a lot of money. It's like middle class pay. And procurators were sent to all different, wherever Rome controlled all these places, they send these people over there to make sure something doesn't go down. And the main thing, if you're a procurator, I guess the main thing would be, because they only stay like a couple of years, the main thing is you just go, serve your time, hope nothing bad happens while you're there, and try to keep things under control. And that didn't happen with Pilate, did it? So, but mainly they would not antagonize the local people, but Pilate did exactly that, and we've talked about him. And his patron, Sejanus in Rome, he was suspected of he was executed for treason shortly before the trial of Jesus. And so that's got to be on Pilate's mind, because that's trickling down. Everybody knows, well, Sejanus is the patron of Pilate, and he's out there. And then news is coming back, and then the trial of Jesus comes up, and he's already messed up a bunch of times too. And the trial of Jesus comes up, and the Jewish people say, if you set him free, you're not a friend of Rome. Your patron's executed for treason. They're going to send a message and say, I don't care what Rome does. And Pilate says, well, okay, I'll just wash my hands of this. Well, I'm not going to take care of that. So it's a bad time for Pilate. So he's the fifth one, and he is the one associated, of course, with the trial of Jesus. He skipped down to... and the only two that we really know, or maybe one more, but is Felix and Festus. And Felix is number 12, and he's associated with the trial of Paul. And there are parallels, like in Luke's Gospel and Acts, because Volume 1 and then you have Volume 2. And some people have put this in chart form, and I think maybe they're pushing some of this, but you look at the trial of Jesus, and then you look at the trial of Paul, and you see parallels between the two. But Felix is this procurator in the time of Paul, and he's in Acts 23 and 24. He's contemporary with Agrippa II, as we said, and that whole dining room porch thing. No, I'm sorry, that's Festus, the dining room porch thing. So Felix... If you go to the book of Acts in chapter 23, and of course Paul is in Jerusalem, and basically a riot starts, and Paul, is trying to take care of himself, speak for himself, and the Roman soldiers have a garrison at the Antonia fortress, and they can tell, something's going on. They swoop down. And so you have Paul's defense in chapter 22. And when they listen to him, because he speaks in Aramaic, and they listen to him until he gets up to the point that God sent me to the Gentiles, and all, that breaks out. And so the Roman government really protects Paul's life here. All right, in chapter 23 and 24, we have Paul before he's moved over to Caesarea, and they send a letter with him. And in chapter 24, he stands before Felix, and we're told that Felix's wife, in verse 24 of chapter 24, Felix arrived with Drusilla, his wife, who was Jewish. And he sent for Paul and heard him speak about faith in Christ Jesus. And he's discussing righteousness, self-control, and the judgment to come. And Felix became frightened and responded and said, "Go away. When I have opportunity, I'll call for you." So he's the one that's famous for that. At the same time, he's hoping, to get some money out of this. So at the last verse of chapter 24, 2 years passed, Felix is succeeded by Porcius Festus. And we have in chapters 24 and 25 about him. Skip down to
Does
the...
that word mean pig? Porcius?
That's Latin, and I don't know Latin much, so I don't know. Maybe it does. Have you studied Latin? Does it, you think?
Just kind of.
In just a moment, somebody will probably look that up. Yeah.
Get out my Latin training.
We'll have the answer just magically, just like. I don't know. Anybody else know? Okay. The last, and this is going to get us into the Jewish war. The last procurator is Florus, 64 through 66. 66 is the start of the Jewish revolt. Jerusalem burned in 70, Masada in about 72, 73. And so the revolt started in 66. The Romans hadn't really completed the whole mission until about 73 or 74. So it's a long time and a lot of resources to do this. But it's very volatile. And people out of work, and then you got rulers, that just are acting like they shouldn't be acting. But Florus was the procurator, and this is not the call. This is not like the shot of the fire, heard around the world. But it is a cause. Florus ordered soldiers to go to the upper market in Jerusalem, and they plundered it, and they killed everyone in every house. And on that day, there about 3,600 people were crucified. And at about the same time, there were riots that broke out in Caesarea on the seacoast, Maritima, mainly because some Gentiles offered a dove in the courtyard of a synagogue. And the Jewish people then, back and forth at that. Well, Florus sent soldiers over there as well, and he arrested the Jews, not the Gentiles. The Gentiles are the one who instigated that. That didn't go well for the Jews, and so it's usually thought that the revolt began in Caesarea, but it spreads all throughout the land. And in September of 66, look at Acts 5, verse 37. This is, Peter and John are arrested, and Gamaliel in verse 34 is going to speak, and he talks about different people that are mentioned here. But in verse 37, he says there was this man, Judas of Galilee, and he drew away some people after him. So he had some followers. He also perished, and all those who followed him were scattered. Well, he led a revolt. He was a rebel. He'd be the same sort of person as like Barabbas was. Not just an ordinary criminal, but somebody who would, in the term today in our land, is terrorist. That's what these people were. So that guy here is Judas of Galilee. In 66, September of 66, his son is Menahem, went down to Masada. So Masada is a Roman garrison, and Herod the Great had a palace there, and so they keep Roman soldiers there. And it's a hard place to take. But he went and took Masada from the Roman guards. He and not just him, but he had other people with him. Then he went to Jerusalem, which is a pretty good journey. And Josephus says, in the state of a king he came, and he had the high priest murdered because he said, you're collaborating with the Romans. So he had the high priest murdered. Then he put on royal robes and he came out. And he's going to address the people in the temple courts. And the supporters of the high priest, the murdered high priest, killed Menahem. But he had these other followers around, and one of those is a man named Eliezer ben Yair. And he fled with others to Masada again, because they already taken Masada, and so he goes down there, and they hold out down there throughout the Jewish war. So that's 66. Eliezer ben Yair was a relative of Menahem, and then the Romans, they're not going to put up with this revolt, and so they come in and they start moving through the land. It's during that time too that Josephus is a Jewish general. He's up around Galilee, and he said he convinces the town, and he hides in a well, and he convinces the guys in a well with him. He said the best thing we can do is surrender to the Romans. Or no, he said the best thing we can do is kill ourselves and not surrender to the Romans. And then Josephus says, "You go first." And he did, and then Josephus crawled out of the well and surrendered to the Romans. And he said, "Look, I can be of service to you." But he wrote Antiquities. He wrote about the Jewish war, the life of Josephus. He had a nice house in Rome. He took the name Flavius in honor of the emperor of Rome as his name, Flavius Josephus. So you can imagine Jewish people hated him. But he gives an eyewitness account of the atrocities of the destruction of Jerusalem. All right, anything you want to say or ask before we take a break?
Porkis does mean pig or swine or hog.
Okay, thank you. All right, we will get going back at 7:12. So in 66, there's all kind of fighting in the streets, and there's this all kind of unrest, and the Romans are going to take care of that. Nero's the emperor at this time, and Vespasian is the ruler. And so Vespasian comes, and as Glenn pointed out, Vespasian probably would have taken care of the rebellion. This is Rome. Yeah, sorry. Did I have to say all that again? I don't remember what I said. In 66, there was just fighting all over the place, just fighting in the streets and riots, and the Roman procurator wasn't doing much about it, and the Jewish people are revolting against the Roman Empire. And Nero's emperor, Vespasian is the general, and he probably would have, put that down pretty quick, but then Nero dies, and he runs back, and his son Titus becomes the general. And Titus is the one who conquers Jerusalem and burns the city and burns the temple. And the Arch of Titus, you ever seen that? You can search that on the internet. It's pictures a triumphal procession of Roman soldiers carrying articles out of the temple. Prominent is the menorah, the giant lamp stand, candle holder thing, as they're carrying them out, and it's pretty huge. So,
It's in Jerusalem.
what
The arch is where?
It's in Rome.
In Rome.
is it in Rome?
I thought it was in Rome.
I don't know where it is. It's not in Israel. I know that.
But it has images of
Yeah, it's the carving of this triumphal procession of the soldiers carrying off the holy articles from the temple. And you can search and find the picture. You think it's in in just a moment, somebody magically will have the answer.
Hint.
Yeah.
I got the pig, he'll have to get.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah. And that whole idea too. I mean, we could go down a side road with this, and it's pretty interesting. Well, we're not going to side road of this triumphal procession. Paul uses that picture in 2 Corinthians and other places of a triumphal procession. The Romans conquered the world, and so they brought that back to Rome, and they would enact all that. I mean, they'd flood the Colosseum and have ships out there and reenact the naval battles. You got an answer?
It's on the Via Sacra in Rome.
Okay, yeah. That's like, it's public place, or you can drive around, I guess you can just see it there. It's not in some museum or something.
Right.
Yeah. I've never been to Rome, and I've never seen it, so, but I've seen movies with it in it. But they would bring the battle and the glory of the battle and the victory back to Rome, and they would have a procession. And Paul talks about this in Corinthians, how that the Romans paint their faces red in honor of Jupiter, and they would lead all the spoils of war on wagons, and the slaves that they took in war would be behind them, and they would burn incense. And Paul talks about the gospel, the smell is the smell of victory for those who are in Christ, but it's the smell of defeat for those who are not in Christ. It's picturing that whole triumphal procession, which is a powerful image in Paul's writings.
It's hard to wrap your mind around because it's one of those parables that the bad guys are
Yeah.
sounding like the good guys, but it's just I know it's just an analogy, but.
Everybody would know about that in the Roman
The
world.
whole word triumph
Yeah,
comes from that, doesn't it?
exactly.
That's the origin of the word triumph.
Yeah, this triumphal procession. So Vespasian, or and as emperor, and then Titus as the military commander, and they conquered Jerusalem. And I mean, you can read in Josephus, and you can find descriptions of how terrible it was. What we're going to do before we stop tonight is look at Matthew 24, but let's go over there right now. And Jesus is talking about the suffering that's going to come associated with the destruction of Jerusalem. Well, I guess we just go ahead and do this now. Will somebody read verse 34?
Verily I say unto you, this generation shall not pass till all these things be fulfilled.
Okay. This can be controversial, but and there are various people have seen how this works out in this chapter. But I'm convinced that J. Marcellus Kick wrote a book on this. He called it Eschatology of Victory. And he says verse 34 is the time text. And so Jesus says, this generation will not pass away until all these things take place. What would these things be, you think? Everything he said before that, yeah. All right, so there's a generation, Jesus said, that won't pass away till these things take place. And some people, the word generation is genea in Greek. Some people, you may even have a Bible that has a footnote, and it'll say, our race of people. But that's never used that way in the Gospel of Matthew. It's always used for a generation of people who are living. So Jesus is saying there are people here. The people that are living now will not pass away until these things take place. So if we take generation seriously, and if we take what Jesus is saying seriously, then this is the time text, as Kick puts it. Everything up to this point has to apply to that. The difficulty is we have immediately before that, like verse 29, the tribulation of those days, the sun darkened, the moon not giving its light, stars falling from the sky, and then the sign of the Son of Man appear in the sky. All the tribes on earth will mourn. They'll see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of the sky with power and great glory. He'll send forth his angels with a great trumpet blast. They'll gather together his elect from the four winds, from one end of the sky to the other. What kind of language does that sound like? Yeah, that sounds like second coming language. Yet, is it limited to that? That's apocalyptic language. It's like language of Daniel, Ezekiel, Revelation. It's crisis language, and other prophets. You remember on September 11th, Alan Jackson had a song. Well, it's still out. It's called "Where Were You When the World Stopped Turning?" Did the world physically stop turning at that point? No, of course not. That's a songwriter writing in a song, poetry conveying a thought. And that's sort of like what this language is like here. Now again, there's good Bible students who have taken this, that Jesus is talking about destruction of Jerusalem, now he's talking about second coming, now he's talking about destruction of Jerusalem again. Yet, with verse 34, this makes sense to me. Everything up to verse 34 is destruction of Jerusalem. So even this language here is apocalyptic language describing the horror of that time.
It's symbolic, like,
Yeah.
like that is that, it seems to be what he's saying there, that what's going to happen to Jerusalem at that time is like a microcosm of the judgment day.
Yeah.
It was the end of time for Jerusalem.
Yeah.
Which is symbolic of the end of the later end of time. So that's why, I think that's why it's using that language.
Yeah, and the prophets use
All
that. Yeah,
that harmonize together.
Dual purpose.
yeah.
Yeah.
The prophets use language like that, and they talk about day of the Lord.
Well, isn't there other places where the sun will be darkened, the moon won't give its light, and the stars fall in heaven?
Yeah.
So that was to me just to describe a cataclysmic event,
Yeah,
like all this destruction, not reality, where my father said he saw the stars fall from heaven. And that was the stars fell on Alabama. It was just that big meteor shower.
yeah.
But people of his generation were convinced that those were stars falling.
If you're in the middle of that, you might be.
Right.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, it's language that the prophets used, and so it's just like the day of the Lord, Yom Adonai, is the day when God has His day, and it's a day of judgment for God's enemies. It's a day of deliverance, a day of light for God's people, and there are successive days of the Lord, and there is a final day of the Lord that's still future for us. And so, yeah, and then this can picture that as well. But it's picturing this generation won't pass away till these things take place.
The other thing that I had heard in the sermon, several times it talks about those days.
Yeah.
Verse 19, 22, those days.
Yep.
29, those days. And then even to 33, these things. That's a lot of stuff happening. It's not the main event.
Yeah.
And after that, it says, of that day, verse 36, which means the day that Jesus comes again, which no man knows, there's no sign.
Yeah.
Because
He says, I can give you signs of this, but there's no signs of that.
that day is coming.
Yeah.
We didn't even know when it's coming.
Yeah. Yeah, that contrast is there too, and Kick brings that out, that those days and that day. So, yeah, there's a contrast between the two sections. He says, I'll give you signs of this and signs of this, and when you see the abomination of desolation, Jerusalem surrounded by Roman armies, you know that the end is near. But then in verse 36, but about that day and hour, no one knows. And he says it'll be like in the days of Noah, be unexpected. And
It all goes back to the questions asked when you put Luke's account and Matthew's together. They asked like 4 questions. After
Yep.
they had said, "Hey, look at this," and he said, "Today's coming when that son will be on top of one another," and so that they said, "Well, tell us, when will that happen? What's the sign of your coming and the
end of the age,
That's
yeah.
the only way they could reconcile that in their mind. Well, the temple will be destroyed when time is at the end of the age, and so they. And when you realize that they asked 4 different questions, and Jesus gives them the answers to those different questions in the order they ask them,
Yeah,
it really makes a lot more sense.
it does. Yeah. Kick says 34 is the time text. He says verse 35 is an oath that makes that certain. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will not pass away. And in context, it's my words about the destruction of Jerusalem. And so verse 36, Kick calls the transition text. And so you have the conjunction but in English there. And in Greek, there's something that's special here in this verse 36. It's not just the Greek word or conjunction, but it's another construction that most times in the New Testament, when it's used, it's a complete change of subject. For instance, in 1 Corinthians, when Paul says, but concerning the collection, but concerning meat offered to idols, that same phrase is used. That's found here. So it is a change of subject, I think. All right, any other thoughts? We're going to look at what he says, the suffering before this. All right, about the second coming runs through chapter 25, and the keynote there is be watchful. You don't know when that's going to happen. And it doesn't mean that day will take you like a thief in the night. Paul says to the Thessalonians that day will not overtake you as a thief in the night because you're ready. You're expecting that time, but you don't know when it will happen. I told you before in 1987, I received a little booklet that in the mail, and it said 87 reasons why Jesus is coming in 1987. Well, the year passed and he didn't come. 1988, I received another booklet in the mail from these people, and it was the same booklet, and they put another cover on it and said 88 reasons Jesus is coming in 1988, and they added another reason.
And they added, because he did not come in 1987.
Yeah, that'd be a good one. They were thinking they could do that. So,
Got to 2000, it was just all of them.
yeah. We got to stop this.
Volume 2.
We're spending too much sending these booklets out. All right, so backing up, anything else before we back up to verse 4? Long time ago, I wrote my master's thesis on Matthew 24. I really wrote it in relation to what's usually called the 80-70 movement, I think. And I don't really want to read any more about that mess anymore. You know. But it was a good study of Matthew 24, and I learned a lot from that. So in verse 4, Jesus says, see to it that no one misleads you. Many will come in my name saying, I am the Christ, and they'll mislead many people. And that was true. There are a lot of, some of these people, like those people in Acts 5 that he mentions long before, they were showing up and saying, I'm the Messiah. I'm the Messiah. Because there's this messianic fervor all around. I'm the Messiah. I'm the one. Many will say, I'm the Christ. They'll mislead many people. You'll hear of wars and rumors of wars. And you hear that in the Roman Empire, you know, and all that going on. And the main thing is, don't be alarmed. Those things must take place. That's not yet the end. Nation will rise against nation, kingdom against kingdom. There will be famines and earthquakes in various places. And there are all records of famines during that time period and earthquakes during that time. And we talked about the year of the 4 emperors, you know, all that going on. But he says, all those things are just the beginning of birth pains, and they'll hand you over to tribulation and kill you, and you'll be hated by all nations because of my name. I mean, it's tremendous suffering in Jerusalem because of the zealots and also because the Romans, as they had laid siege to Jerusalem. The Zealots, there was enough grain probably to last, a long time siege, and they burned it up. Just to do it, I guess. I don't know. I
Do you
guess,
think God was gonna deliver them or something?
I don't know.
Oh, well, you can't
guess.
read your minds. but-
Yeah.
Ben could do that.
Yeah. They were called zealots and not called zealots for nothing. Yeah. And they were strongly nationalistic, for the Jewish people. And they hated Romans. And they have, their roots are in the Sicarii, and Sicarii means a little dagger, and they would slip around and where there's gatherings and assassinate Roman officials and things and then slip out. They just hated Roman rule, that they're going to act, and it would be like, setting this off and doing this over here and doing this over here. Which is strange again in the group of the apostles. One of the apostles, is it Simon?
Yep.
Simon is
Zealot.
a zealot. And then you have Matthew. What did he do? Tax collector. How do you think they got along? Jesus calls these people from such different backgrounds together. The answer to my question is they changed because they were with Jesus. So all kind of suffering. They'll hand you over to tribulation, kill you. You'll be hated because of my name. Many will fall away. They'll betray one another. There are all kinds of stories in Josephus of betrayal in families, even cannibalism, and just hate. The false prophets will rise up. Lawlessness increase. The love of many people will grow cold. But the one who endures to the end is the one who will be saved. What end do you think he's talking about there? In this context, that's right. I'm not comfortable pulling this verse out and preaching a sermon about us enduring to the end of time. And saved here means your life is saved. You made it through this.
You don't really have to use that verse, but.
No. That's right. But I have heard this verse in sermons and memes. And he even talks about the spread of the gospel, and that happens as well. As Paul is preaching around, and he talks about the gospel's been preached to the whole world. And then the end will come. Therefore, when you see the abomination of desolation, which was spoken by the prophet Daniel, standing in the holy place, and let the reader understand. And we studied Daniel, the abomination of desolation in Daniel, I think is talking about Antiochus or Antiochus Epiphanes, when he came in and offered a pig on the altar and made it unclean. So Daniel is looking to those times. Jesus is quoting Daniel, and he's basically saying here is another Daniel situation of abomination of desolation. And this happened when Roman soldiers went into the holy temple courts and the temple area. Then those who are in Judea must flee to the mountains. Whoever's on the housetop must not go down and take things out of the house. Again, if this is talking about second coming, and I've heard people try to make this, this is just silly.
Yeah, right.
Or it could be the rapture,
Yeah.
But nobody knows that.
Nope.
So if you're raptured, you don't go down in the house and get your stuff.
You leave your car and go.
Yeah. If you're in the field, you must not turn back to get the cloak. And then woe to those women who are pregnant and those who are nursing babies in those days. So all this is talking about the suffering at the time of Jerusalem. And you pray that when you flee, it'll not be in winter or on Sabbath, and that's because of difficulty traveling. The main thing in winter in the land of Israel is rain. I mean, it's cold in Jerusalem. Israel has so many elevations. It's such a small country, and you have so many different types of climate. It can be snowing in Jerusalem and burn up hot down around the Dead Sea. So the main thing is, and in winter it rained all the time, and so it's difficulty traveling or on Sabbath, because if one says, well, I'm a very good Jew and I will not travel on Sabbath. Well, if we don't get out of here right now on Sabbath, then we're going to be killed.
I heard too that the gates would be closed and barred.
Yeah.
You wouldn't be allowed to leave
Certainly.
on the Sabbath.
Yep.
So,
Yeah. So pray that when you flee, that it's not during that time, and there will be great tribulation, such as not occurred since the beginning of the world until now, nor ever will again. What do you think about that verse?
Pretty eye-opening, because, it's been some pretty rough times.
Yeah, you think of the Holocaust.
Yeah.
So he's not saying there won't be suffering again, but D.A. Carson, I don't have that quote, in his commentary on Matthew, says that there's never been the greater concentration of a large number, like of a city of the size of Jerusalem, who suffered in the ratio that's there, as in the time of the destruction of Jerusalem. And again, it's not like, okay, well, there's one more that suffered. It's not that idea. It's tremendous suffering. And if those days not been cut short, no life would have been saved. But for the sake of the elect, those days will be cut short. One thing I didn't mention, if you look back, no, it's coming up. So, God's providence, He's working in this. It's judgment, just like sending the people into Babylonian slavery. It's judgment. And so if anybody says to you, behold, here's the Christ, He's over there, don't believe Him, there's false Christ and false prophets arise, and they'll provide these great signs and wonders to mislead. And there's history of all that. I've told you in advance. And so if they say to you, behold, He's in the wilderness, don't go out there. If He's in the inner room, do not believe them. For just as the lightning comes from the east and flashes as far from as the west, so will the coming of the Son of Man be. That means when I come, you'll know it. You won't have to guess. Wherever the corpse is, there the vultures will gather. Jerusalem is now a corpse. And we've talked about the verses that follow about this apocalyptic language. And one thing that is striking is in verse 30. So if we're going to hold to this, and I do hold to this, that everything up to verse 34 is destruction of Jerusalem, then he says they will see the sign of the Son of, they will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of the sky. So this was a coming of the Son of Man. But it's not the second coming. And that was that whole deal about the AD 70 movement. If you don't know, the 80s, people who hold to what's called the AD 70 doctrine say that the destruction of Jerusalem was the second coming. They equate that. It's pretty strange. And then they'll use words in slippery ways and, well, I don't mean that, I mean this. And it's among churches of Christ I'm talking about. And they still take the Lord's Supper until He comes, I guess, but they think He's already come. He already came. But it really is a dangerous doctrine in the sense that Peter or John says that we don't know what we'll be like, but we know that when we see Him, we shall be like Him. There's this, and everyone who has this hope purifies himself. He is pure. So that hope of the second coming of the parousia is a practical hope as we seek to live here. We're anticipating that coming. Well, if He already came, then that takes that away, I think. So He did come in the destruction of Jerusalem. That was not the second coming. He tells this little parable about the fig tree, And when you see that, you'll know that he is near, right at the door. And then 34, the time text. 36, the transition. But about that day and hour, no one knows. Not even the angels of heaven, nor the Son, but the Father alone. And the point is about the illustration of Noah is they were just carrying on normal life, and it hit them unexpectedly. They weren't ready for that. That's the same thing about verses 40 and 41, which are usually taken as rapture verses. 2 men in the field, one taken, one left. 2 women grinding at the mill, one taken, one left. You see anything rapture in that? It's just 2 people, and there's a separation between the 2. So be on the alert. You don't know which day your Lord is coming. And then he tells this other parable. And the point, and there's implied, it seems, in these parables that it's not, when he tells them this, it's not going to be tomorrow. Or it's not going to be very, very soon, in a sense. I mean, he says, of that day no one knows, but then Paul writes some passages and he says certain things have to happen before Christ comes again. So he's not giving direct signs, specific signs, but he is saying certain things have to happen before he comes again. Now I think those certain things have already happened, but he is saying he's gone for a long time, you don't expect him to come back, then he comes back. And then the parable of the virgins, the parable of the talents, and then you have the judgment picture there in 25. Okay, thoughts, comments, questions?
What's the end game of the 80, 70 thing?
I don't know really. I wrote about him in my paper and I corresponded with him, so I don't think it's slander if I mention his name, but I corresponded with Don Preston, and I told him I was writing a thesis on the 80, 70 movement, and he said, and he's for it. And he thinks the second coming happened in 70. And he said, if you'll send me a copy of your thesis, I'll send you everything I've written about it. And he sent all kind of like little booklets and pamphlets and different things. And I read all.
The main starter of it?
No, he's not the starter of it. It has, Max King Among Churches of Christ, but then it has roots in Russell and some other folks on back. There's always fringe group people around, and there was some fringe people in even 3rd century who said some of the things. But I don't understand the motivation. I'm not doubting their sincerity of Scripture and that they're sincere, and I'm not doubting that they believe Scripture. I think they're just saying, okay, we have to take this way, literally. And that's the danger of having our minds made up in a certain way, and then you have to force every Scripture into that, rather than going to Scripture and saying, okay, well, and sometimes it's going to challenge, maybe we've made our minds up in a certain way. But we have to go to Scripture and let Scripture speak. So, I don't know. I wrote that in 99 maybe, or 2000. And I haven't really read much about it since then. I just not that interested in it.
Not profitable, is it?
What?
It's not profitable to bother with.
Yeah. It's profitable for my thesis, I guess, but do I?
Thessalonians, didn't they think that resurrection had already, was not going to happen or something?
The Corinthians, some of the Corinthians did.
Thessalonians
Yeah.
apparently had a problem with thinking that the second coming was just
Yeah.
tomorrow or the next day.
Yeah, he said some things have to happen first. So, and Hymenaeus and Philetus, Paul mentions. So, again, we got to be careful where and it's fascinating, the end times. I mean, I'm hearing all kind of preachers preach on Israel and everything, you know, these days with the war going on, and I'm talking about in the greater religious world. And, you know, some of that fascinates us, but we got to be careful in areas of end times, eschatology, where God is not clear with this. God will work his will. But one thing we have to do is we have to remain exegetically biblical. And so when people show up and they say, well, it doesn't seem like the world's getting worse and there are wars and rumors of wars, well, you know, it's pretty much been that way for a while. But Jesus is, and they're talking about this passage here. And they're saying, well, the second coming's near, and because there's wars and rumors of wars. But again, this is talking, I think, about destruction of Jerusalem. The only way to get around that generation, this generation will not pass away until these things take place. The only way to get around that is to understand the word generation as a race of people. And so he's saying the Jewish people as a race will not pass away until these things take place. Well, the Jewish people are still a race of people today.
Well, and I've heard it, other preachers saying that actually the race of the Jews ended in Jerusalem. All the records, there's no way anybody can trace their heritage back to,
No Jew today can really
so
trace himself back.
it's a religion more than a race.
Yeah, and it becomes a religion. We can talk about that in just a second. About even during the Jewish war, there was a rabbi who established a school up around Galilee, and it really grew after the Jewish war, the Jewish war of 66 to 70, and it is the fundamental tenets of rabbinic Judaism that we have today. So rabbinic Judaism is based on Torah and based on Scripture, but it's based on many of those ideas that came out of that. And so, and some scholars suggest even that whole idea of Jews and Gentiles and the tensions are behind the occasions of some of the writings that we have. Okay, anything else on 24, chapter 24? You have my contact stuff on the syllabus. If you want to, I'll be glad to send you a copy of my thesis if you ever want to read it. I wouldn't if I was you, but I dealt with Matthew 24, Luke 17, and Luke 21. Luke 21 is talking about destruction of Jerusalem as well. Luke 17 is talking about, I think, the parousia, the second coming. So, I mean, I went back and read some of it the other day, and I thought, boy, this is bad. But anything else on Matthew 24?
It can't be going back and forth between.
It could. Again, there are good Bible students who've seen it that way. So, I mean,
Like it's sort of like, I guess, paralleling two events, maybe back and forth, or you don't.
well, the looming event is the destruction of Jerusalem. And Jesus is prophesying about that, and the liberal scholars don't want that because they don't think Jesus could prophesy about the future. He's just a man, but he's prophesying about that because he is God and he knows those events. It could be going back and forth, and the main reason that people give for wanting to go back and forth is the language in 29 through 31 about the sun being dark and the moon not giving its light. J.W. McGarvey, he understood it as destruction of Jerusalem, second coming, destruction of Jerusalem, then second coming.
So is that not like sort of like meteor shower language too there? Is there a meteor shower that took place during this time at the destruction of Jerusalem, or is that meaning something else?
There are some strange events. I mean,
stars will fall from heaven kind of thing, or?
yeah, it doesn't have to be literal. I mean, it could, have its roots in some of that, because Josephus writes about some strange events, and he was an eyewitness of that. I mean, it seems like when I start speaking out of my memory and my mind, that things can get crazy. But it seems like he talks about a cow giving birth to a two-headed calf during this time. I don't know. But Josephus was an eyewitness of all that. And so, there are famines, there's a war, you hear wars, and you hear of all this going on, and so all that's going on. So there could be. And eclipses and meteor showers and all that kind of stuff were pretty terrifying to people in the ancient world. Kind of terrifying to me. Anything else on Matthew 24? Okay, well, when the war is still going on, let me talk about that rabbi that was mentioning, and we're going to wrap it up pretty soon here. His name is Zakkai, Zakkai, and he founded a rabbinical school in the town of Yamnia. This is in Israel. So the war is going on. So, I mean, as the Romans are moving through the land, it's not like all of a sudden, they attack everything at one point. They're not flying helicopters above, and just bringing, they're sweeping through the land with the soldiers, and as they bring in more soldiers, and as they bring in siege battering rams. And so, life's going on in all these different places. So this rabbi starts a rabbinical school, and following the war, his school, they had discussions about the canon, the Hebrew canon, and also they had discussions early on, since Jesus is Jewish and Christianity has its roots in Judaism, the Roman government didn't really see a difference between Jews and Christians. And the Roman government also allowed Jews to practice their religion. It wasn't illegal to do that. And then later on, it became illegal to be a Christian. So Christians are separated. And then there's Jewish hatred. And you see the seeds of some of this, I think, in the book of Acts. I mean, Paul goes to a synagogue and he preaches and they don't listen. And so he goes to another synagogue about 30 miles away, 35 miles away. And then he gets there, and the same people that caused the trouble at the other synagogue show up there. I mean, how bad do you have to hate somebody to walk 35 miles to go over there to stop him? And they didn't say, well, it's not we appreciate you coming. We're not going to listen to you, but thanks for coming. We're just not interested. They didn't say that. They're trying to stop other people from hearing. And so there becomes this tension between Jews and Christians. And by the 80s and 90s, synagogues had a liturgy, part of their service. It's called a 19th benediction, and it was a blessing. If you put blessing in quotation marks, which is a euphemism for a curse. And it was a curse on all heretics, and the ones that really stood out were Christian Jews. It's called, if you ever want to look it up, it's called Birkat, B-I-R-K-A-T-H, Ha-Manim, H-A-M-I-N-I-M. And so literally it's a blessing on the heretics. Min is a heretic. Manim is a heretic. So a blessing on the heretics. Well, they're not blessing the heretics. It's a curse on the heretics. And so here's what it says. Let the Nazarenes and the heretics perish as in a moment. Let them be blotted out of the book of the living, and let them not be written with the righteous. So, yeah. I'd rather hear bless your heart than that. So, but it's out of that school that a lot of the ideas of rabbinic Judaism. Okay, as you fast forward to, and when Rome captured Jerusalem, they had coins minted that said Judea is captured. We need to talk about Masada. Eliezer ben Yair was the relative of that guy, who killed the high priest, and he escaped down to Masada. So the Romans had destroyed Jerusalem, burned the temple, burned Jerusalem, and yet there's 900 and something people. I'm trying to find my number here. 900 something people, and they're holding out at Masada. 960 men, women, and children. And Eliezer ben Yair, so the Romans go down there and they build a ramp, a dirt ramp, which you can't build that overnight. They bring a whole legion in there and build a ramp. It's 960 people inside there, but it's the principle of the thing. And they roll the siege ramp up and they start battering on the walls and everything and trying to burn. And Eliezer ben Yair is inside and he gathers all the people in the synagogue and he tells them the noble thing to do is to kill themselves. And so the Romans knock the door down or the walls down, and when they come in, they find 960 bodies on top of Masada. And Masada is like the Jewish army is sworn in on Masada these days. So, and there are a lot of relics that have been found there. In fact, sandals and things are in the museum in Jerusalem from there. So
Wasn't there like one woman and one child that were alive, I think?
yeah, maybe so. Yeah, the Zealots of Masada, and there's some books out there on that whole event, like The Last Stand of the Zealots of Masada and different things. It seemed like there was a movie one time I watched.
I think there was some on TV, maybe.
Yeah, I think so.
I thought I read somewhere where, I guess it was that guy taught them how you would sacrifice the lamb for Passover, and that's what they did. They cut their throats. And so he trained the head of the household how to kill the lambs, and that's what they did. They killed their family, and then they killed themselves.
Yeah,
That's, I don't know where I remember reading that.
it makes sense. Yeah. Masada's been excavated. Yadin is the excavator, and he wrote a book on that, and other books have been written. It's really a fascinating place. When I was that one time I've been to Israel, I went, part of it was for a graduate school, and we had to pick out places and do research, and then write papers, and then give a presentation of a place. And the place I picked, the major place I picked, was Masada, so I had to write a paper on that. But it's an inspiring story, but it shows the tenacity and perseverance and the hatred of the Romans as they're coming through. All right, anything on that? All right, and so Judea becomes like a Roman place, and then they even rename it Aelia Capitolina, and they have where their God's temple stood. They have pagan temples, and so following this, and Judaism becomes then dependent. And the rabbis say, since there's no temple to offer sacrifices, prayer and good works take the place of that. And Orthodox Jews are waiting for Jesus to come the first time, and when he comes, then the temple will be rebuilt. Premillennial people are waiting on Jesus to come the second time, and when he comes, they think the temple will be rebuilt. That's why Orthodox Jewish people and premillennial people are kind of buddies. They're waiting on the same thing.
Israel's so important
Yeah, in foreign policy and stuff. Yep, exactly. All right, there was a final Jewish revolt in 132 through 135, and it's by a man named Simeon, and he had the nickname Bar Kokhba. Bar Kokhba means son of a star. And Rabbi Akiva is a prominent rabbi who wrote much, and I read a lot of his stuff, but he said Bar Kokhba was the Messiah. Well, he wasn't, but Rabbi Akiva said he was. So that uprising again is a revolt, but that was just, taken care of. The Romans said, stop, we're not doing that again. And the Jews were basically kicked out of Jerusalem, forbidden to enter, except for one day of the year when they could go into the Western Wall and mourn the destruction. But from that point on, Jewish Christians are, they're scattered all over. All right, and that's past New Testament times.
So when the city was rebuilt after the destruction, it was rebuilt by the Romans.
Yeah.
It's sort
Yeah.
of like, when we World War II, Japan, destroyed Japan, then we rebuilt it.
Yeah.
As the United States did. So.
And then you come to Constantine, and Constantine's mother's finding all the places over there that happened in the Bible, because now the Roman Empire becomes Christian, if you put that in quotation marks. And then she's finding all these places and marking them and everything. And that then turns into a big pilgrim thing. All right, any final thing you want to say or question? Please don't go back to Joshua and ask a question, but anything you need to ask?
You can speculate various reasons why the city of Jerusalem was, it was clear cut. It was completely leveled. Why did God do that? But something I read, someone was giving some possible reasons. One was Christianity may have never spread much further than that. They would have stayed there, possibly. At least the spread would have not been as quickly or so on. This is, like I said, this is more or less post-New Testament times, but when all that happens, but that spread. That was just, it removed the temple, which was a little bit of kind of a stumbling block for the Jews, the Jewish Christians. It removed that, it removed a mother church, so to speak, just different things like that seem to help expedite spreading it further.
And God's working in all that, and I don't know. It's I know in the Book of Acts, the apostles are in the temple area, and there, and God's working through all that. It seems the main reason that the Jerusalem and the temple was destroyed was judgment on the Jewish people,
Ultimately,
they rejected the
just like
Messiah.
it was with Babylon.
Yeah, certainly.
Babylon came in,
Yeah. And then that stands as a lesson, I think, just like Babylon and just like Sodom and Gomorrah, and just all these are, and it's a call to respond to God. Any other thoughts or questions, comments?
Masada means strong foundation.
Does? That's impressive. Thank you. It's like a mountain fortress.
Right.
Yeah.
I guess that's the strong foundation.
You have to take a cable car to get up there. You can. I didn't. I don't know whether they let people do it, but there is it's called the snake path that goes alongside.
Climb up the road in the siege mount.
Yeah. The ramp's still there. You can see the ramp.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, it's pretty huge because
yeah.
it's fairly high.
Yeah. I can't remember the dimensions. Yeah.
It's not like it's just a little bitty.
Yeah. And when Herod had his palace there, he had all kind of nice luxury items.
So he was the one that you said did all the building.
Herod the Great,
To
yeah.
keep the economy going, like the Great New Deal sort of thing.
I don't know if he did it to keep the economy going. He just wanted to make a name for himself as a builder. He wanted to build, and he did. And he built some. He rebuilt Jericho and different places, and the temple is the main thing. But it did keep the economy going. So during the time of Jesus, economy would have been pretty good. Okay, thank you. Have a good week. Thank you again for being involved in this, and I've been encouraged by it.